Greetings, my magnificent ones. Sue Paulson here, your magnificence mentor. Welcome to episode 2 of Heaven on Earth. It's good to be back. Today's topic is all about being the hero that you are. Some of you may have heard of the hero's journey or read about it in a variety of other publications. Well, I wanted to explore that topic a little bit today. It also is a big topic. So let me get started with a piece of it. My grandmother, her name was Grammy Edna Benjamin, said to me at some point in our connection, I never want to miss out on anything in life. Well, in her 87 and a half years, she didn't miss much. She led a life that was filled with triumph and tragedy, with trauma and adversity, with joys and sorrows, and everything in between. She did what she had to do, what she thought she had to do, was compelled to do to survive for a lot of years. She was a depression, she was a young mom in the Depression era, I guess, when I think about it, because she was born in 1905. So times were tough, and she did what was in front of her. Well, she never imagined that, I know she never imagined that she was the hero of her own journey. And I'm sure that there were times when life dealt some pretty horrific blows to her that it felt as if she was never going to make it through. But I come from a stock on both sides of my family, my mom's and my dad's, that are true gritty pioneers that they learned over generations to just soldier on, to keep striving, to keep moving, to the determination was high. So I've inherited some of that. Well, when I reflect on my grandmother's life, I realize, and then reflect on my own life, I realize that I've modeled myself a lot after her, because we spent a great deal of time together when I was right from the time I was 8 years old. She and I were buddies, and I visited her lots. I helped her out in the restaurant that she had, washing dishes and learning to take the customers cash or serve them coffee. I would think I was 8 at the time. So I started young. And of course, by osmosis, because children learn what they live. They learn what by observing other people's actions and so on. Not so much the words, although those get planted in our brains, but the activities that we watch our loved ones go through, the adults in our lives who are important to us. And it's so I picked up on a lot of things that I maybe didn't know I was picking up on, but now when I think back, when I look at some of my own tendencies, I've adopted a similar mindset, a similar way of being and way of doing things, sometimes to my dismay, because I probably picked up a few bad habits along the way. However, that's neither here nor there. So I bring up my grandmother because she grew up in a time when really it didn't seem as if there were very many choices in life. You just dealt with whatever was in front of you the best way you knew how. She was not an educated woman in the schooling sense. I think she finished grade 4, but school was very hard for her. So she was self-educated after that. She read and she learned from other people and so on. And life was not simple growing up in those days. It was a hard scrabble to put enough food on the table, to maintain shelter and so on. Well, she's my hero. there's no question about it that she lived the hero's journey as fully as she knew how. I have great admiration and respect for what she achieved in her lifetime. She used to say to me, well, Susan, all I ever wanted was a tar paper shack that I could call my own. And she achieved far more than that. She was a woman who ended up from being a shy, scared, newly married young woman with little kids to owning, oh golly, at least 3 businesses, all restaurants, and restaurants or cafes of some sort or other, owned 2 or 3 residences through the course of her lifetime. And she did well financially when all was said and done. So it she achieved so much more than I think she ever dreamed was possible. Well, so it's interesting how life turns out. So in my own life, I needed to take a page from her book early. My mom died suddenly when I was 17 years old. It had the impact of imploding our family as we knew it. My dad had to move away to look after a business that wasn't close to where we lived. I had 2 younger brothers that needed looking after, so he remarried and took the rest of the family out of the province, leaving my older brother and I to fend for ourselves. Well, all the dreams that I had had and that my mom had had for me just evaporated. I was upset. It was a huge shock to lose my mom because my perception was mothers didn't die, and certainly not when they have young children in their lives. So this was not something I ever entertained or knew about. In addition to the extreme shock and hurt and I'm sure fear that I felt at being left alone and abandoned by my mom, I was angry. I was really, 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 really angry because it didn't seem right. It didn't seem fair. And here I was left with a life that I hadn't anticipated and I had no clue how to deal with. We didn't know how to grieve in those days. It was just, that British stiff upper lip, carry on one foot in front of the other idea. So I was lost for a period of time. And there I was faced with, well, are you going to go finish your schooling because my last year was a disaster, or are you going to go and get a job? Well, because the dream that my mom had for me had just evaporated, it felt as if the best choice for me was to get a job, which I did. It's interesting that the internal anger that was bubbling around in me that I didn't really know how to express came out in determination. It was, I'll show you. And a lot of it was railing at the God of my understanding at that time. I'll show you, God. I thought we had a deal. You were supposed to look after me. You were supposed to, I've done whatever I knew how to do to be good and follow your rules and all of that. And now you've betrayed me. You took my mother and I'm mad. So all bets are off. I'm just going to live my life the way I know how to and never mind interfering with me because I'm doing it my way. And whatever that was. Well, of course, I didn't have the foggiest clue when you're thrust out into the wide world at 18. And I know there are some of you out there who were thrust into the wide world much younger than 18. It's tough because we don't know the rules. We don't know the terms of engagement. We don't know. We have not necessarily many resources. Now, I was fortunate that I had some support in my life. I was surrounded by aunts and uncles who did whatever they could to guide me along a certain path. And my Uncle Jim helped me find my first apartment, and the mother of a dear friend of mine took me in when I needed a place to stay for a while. So there was guidance there. It wasn't like I was absolutely all on my own, but I still didn't really know how to proceed other than just to, okay, can I get a job? So when I think of the hero's journey, so that was the unconscious start for me, away from the safety of a parental environment, and there I am out in the cold, what seemed to be very cruel world. Well, we look at how much power we have. So I want to talk a little bit about power. So how much power do we actually have in our lives? Well, when life throws something like this at us, some kind of adversity, some kind of big time challenge, it feels as if we're powerless. And it's not unusual to feel quite victimized by the whole idea, and the fact that, or the idea that our choices are taken away from us. Well, let's examine that for a minute, because what are we left with? Well, we're left with the power to choose. That's probably the biggest power that's within our control, that is always there. That doesn't go away. Even if we feel we have no choice, that's not really true either. We might choose between the lesser of two great evils. Well, I don't like either of the choices, but this one seems more palatable than this one. We still choose, or we don't choose. Well, that's a power too, that we say, I'm not picking. I'm just going to allow whatever happens to happen. And we'll get a result regardless of which way we go, whether we pick what we think is the best thing, whether we pick what we think is the worst thing, whether we don't pick at all. There's going to be a result out of that. There's a consequence of the choices that we make or don't make. The same as we might pick a road that we go down and say later, after we go down, and we go, oh, that was a bad choice. Well, maybe yes, and maybe no. Maybe the consequences weren't to your liking, but of course, we can always choose again. We can always go, all right, that wasn't working for me, so let me pick again and do it differently. I remember participating in a personal growth workshop at one point in my life. The instructor had come up from the States, and he, really talented guy, and wonderful to learn from. Well, he was very open about sharing his background and sharing how he had got to be in the front of the room teaching personal growth. It was a tough story. He'd got into drugs, and as a result of his drug addiction, then he started selling drugs, and that just, he got caught and into prison. He went for, oh, I think 5 to 7 years, something like that. Well, of course, there's a big consequence to choices that he made in his life that I'm sure he didn't like. However, it was a wake-up call for him to, and he then had time to seriously examine, okay, what is my life all about? What is it for? Why am I here? How did I get here? Do I really want to be here? Like, where do I go from here? Because you're, even in prison, you're faced with a certain number of choices. Well, he chose to get clean, to not only clean up his physical act and remove the dependency on drugs, but he decided to see if he was more than what he'd originally thought. And as he grew, there was a strength to him that maybe wouldn't have been there had he not gone through that kind of adversity. He chose it. He deliberately, whether he was conscious of choosing that or not. A lot of people certainly who move into an addictive scenario the reason behind it underlying is to reduce their pain, that they're suffering and they're in such pain that this is at least a temporary fix, a temporary solution to a problem that don't know they don't know enough about how to deal with. So so no harm, no foul on that. I mean, we do things in our lives to move forward as best we can. And I think everybody is doing the best they can with what they have. Certainly when we're not conscious that we do have this power within us to choose. We're not even aware of how good we are, never mind our magnificence, then it makes it much more challenging to move through that. And when we become conscious, we start to reflect, we start to track back into the journey of our lives from however young up till the present moment. We begin to see patterns and opportunities, maybe opportunities missed, maybe new opportunities based on where we are now. And if where we are now isn't to our liking, we do have the power to say yes or no. Does fear factor into it? Of course. I've been terrified lots in my life. Terrified that I was going to make the wrong decision, terrified that I wouldn't be able to deal with the consequences if I did make a decision, and everything in between. So fear has dogged my footsteps my whole life because nobody knows the outcome of our choices all that well. We can suspect and we can speculate, but we're never 100% sure that what we pick is going to work out to our liking or not. We just don't know that because there's too many other factors at play, other people involved, what's going on around us, the country we live in, and so on. So what do we have out of that? How do we be the hero in our own lives? Well, we take a page from other people sometimes and say, wow, they did it. And maybe they struggled far more than I'm struggling. Well, if they can do it, I can do it too. So I've borrowed lots of other people's courage, lots of other people's ideas and stories as a way of keeping the momentum going. Or when I just was too distraught to even move one muscle, I lean on the stories of others to help me out, to get me to the next step. Our movie industry is excellent at portraying heroes. Well, do they portray heroes as perfect, unflawed human beings? No, they have things to overcome, not only externally in the environment, but internally as well. Every one of them is faced with, they come face to face with anything that they think is ugly inside them, anything that they think is deficient, and the whole spectrum. And of course, accepting that they have more power than they do can be one of the biggest challenges. Oh, I don't have any power. I'm just a little, like a little ant on the sidewalk, and I have to be careful that I don't get stepped on. Well, that's one perspective. But what if that perspective isn't true? What if you challenge that perspective for yourself and said, I'm more than that. I think I'm more than that. Well, as I've gone through my own life, I know that statement is not wrong. We are more than that. We are far more than we ever imagined, to the point where it's a little bit scary to imagine being as big as we actually are, to being the magnificent beings that we are in human form, come to planet Earth to grow, to experience, and everything in between. Well, if we move into that, if we're become more conscious of it. I was fortunate in my 20s to start on a personal growth track. An opportunity presented itself. I firmly believe now that the universe and I were co-creating in that adventure. I didn't know it at the time. I was totally oblivious to that, but just it was like magic that this opportunity presented itself. It resonated with me so strongly. I thought, oh, I want to do that. I want to find out, because I was always fascinated by what made me tick. And so I wanted to explore more. Well, it was that opportunity that was like the rocket fuel to my rocket that helped me become fully conscious in that moment of how much more powerful I was inside myself. And of course, there were some experiences that were part of that scenario that helped me practice exerting that power and seeing the results. Well, some of them were so amazing. I couldn't dispute what was in front of me. I couldn't say, no, that can't be right. It was real for me. It was true for me. So that gave me tools in my toolbox and a consciousness that I had not had before. So I could no longer stay in the dark and say, well, I really don't know about me. I'm just putting one foot in front of the other. I'm just surviving. I couldn't do that anymore. You can't unthink a thought. You can't unhear what somebody told you. You can't unsee evidence right before your very eyes. So even though I continued to stumble and bumble along and have some successes and then some setbacks and on, I knew in deep in my heart, deep in my gut, deep in my soul, that I do have lots of power. Of course, along with that power comes the responsibility in how it's used. Well, I never wanted to have power over anybody else, because that's not how I operate. And so I was mindful, because of course I recognized my own power and I could see the power in everybody else. And I honored that. And I thought, wow, together we could be so, so, so effective if we combine that. And anytime I've been able to do that in my life, I've seen the benefits of that. When two or more are gathered, the impact that has out in our physical space is pretty phenomenal. And the impact that can have for each of us is also just wondrous. So I want you to think about power this week as you think about your heaven on earth, and maybe what's not working in relation to your heaven on earth. Have a gander through times in your life when you exerted power that you didn't even realize you had. And what was the impact of that? How did that turn out for you? Even the most adverse of circumstances can give us more energy to do whatever comes next. So think about that this week, about the power that we have as the heroes of our own stories, because we want to be that. We want to consciously be our own heroes, live that, because I think that's part of the journey to the heaven on earth that I know I desire, and I suspect maybe you desire. So that's it for today. If you're interested in participating in a community that is actively exploring the ideas of heaven on earth and the magnificence that we all are, I'm going to invite you to check out the Magnificence Lab. You can just go to magnificencelab.org/invite. And there you'll see a little pop-up video. I've co-created this community. I'm co-creating it with Chris Angel, who is not the magician Chris Angel, but Chris Angel has a magic all his own that I particularly enjoy. Well, the two of us are creating this community called Magnificence Lab to explore and engage in the idea of magnificence and how that will contribute to creating heaven on earth. So it's magnificencelab.org/invite. In the meantime, you are magnificent. Maybe you just haven't breathed that in yet. So I encourage you to do that until I see you next week.